Okay, we're live.
Hello. Hi, everyone. Welcome. Welcome to the first live stream in our three-part journey through Codecademy's evolution. We're so excited to walk you through this project from our course, Learn JavaScript. I'm Corey Stieg, Codecademy's content marketing manager, and I'm joined by Fede Garcia Lorca, our community manager, who you probably recognize from forums and Discord, as well as Zoe Bachman, our curriculum director, and Melanie Williams, an instructional designer who will be on hand, ready to answer all of your questions in the chat. So, August is Codecademy's birthday month, which is very exciting. And as Leos, we're going all out and celebrating big. We have a full lineup of plans, including new AI course launches and interactive events like this one, where we'll be covering topics like generative AI and Python for data science. So be sure to check out the calendar, which is linked in the YouTube description below, because we would love to see you there. Today, though, we're throwing it back to the first ever course that Codecademy launched 12 years ago. Learn JavaScript. JavaScript is a fundamental language for web developers, and it's also one of the first languages that people tend to pick up when they're learning how to code. Zoe will be walking us through a project from Learn JavaScript step by step, so you're welcome to follow along. But keep in mind, you can also take this course on your own time whenever you want, and it's also linked in the YouTube description. And this live stream will be available to replay if you get stuck or need hints. Let me tell you a little bit more about Zoe. As the curriculum director at Codecademy, she focuses on finding new ways to make learning to code more accessible and engaging. Zoe is an artist and an educator who's interested in how we use technology to increase political engagement, critique society, and invent new forms of collaboration. Her practice involves research, pedagogy, and creative uses of emerging technology. She is a former member of the guerrilla projection group, The Illuminator, founder of the feminist technology collective Tendernet, and she holds a master's degree from the Interactive Telecommunications program at NYU. Hi, Zoe. Before we jump into the project, I wanted to ask you, what makes JavaScript a good first language and entry into programming?
Yeah, absolutely. So I love teaching JavaScript because it has so many applications, and we'll talk a little bit more about all those different forms of application. But, I find that for first-time programmers, anyone interested in getting into coding, oftentimes you want to build something tangible, and a website is a great thing to build. And so oftentimes you'll start off with HTML and CSS, but if you really want to make your website powerful, exciting, interactive, you need JavaScript for that. And so you can use JavaScript to code interactions on the front end. But if you want to start getting into that full stack programming, you can also use JavaScript for that, which is why we actually, designed our full stack career path with JavaScript as that core language. So you wouldn't have to use a different language if you want to go into programming backends.
Great. Take it away. Let's get into this project.
All right, let's get into it. Hi, everyone. It's so exciting to meet you again. Thank you, Corey. Thank you, Fede. Very excited to be here. It's been a minute since I've done a live stream, but I love live streams. In my job as a curriculum director, I don't always get the opportunity to get face-to-face with learners as much these days. So it's really wonderful to be here with all of you. I've put together a little presentation for us before we get into the project. So let me load that up. All right. So as we were saying, we are going to be talking about Learn JavaScript today, which was it was the first offering from Codecademy. Funny enough, I was on Codecademy as a learner back in 2011 when it first launched. So it's really cool to be here today and talking about it. So what are we going to cover today? We're going to talk a little bit more about the role of JavaScript as a programming language and it being the first course on Codecademy. Then we're going to jump into and talk a little bit about programming logic. I'm really excited. I think logic is one of the most interesting parts of learning how to program, also one of the most difficult parts. So maybe you've started to learn JavaScript, and this I find can be a sort of one of the most early challenges for folks when they're starting to learn how to program. So we're going to talk about it. After that, we're going to go through the race day project, which is in the Learn JavaScript course. So we'll go step by step and talk about how we're going to code that, welcome your questions, welcome your ideas as we go through that. And then we'll have a little bit of a wrap up. So if you do have questions throughout, please post it in the chat. As mentioned, we have Melanie, who's one of our instructional designers in web development, hanging out there, and she'll make sure to pass me any questions that I can answer live. Okay, so moving right along, our objectives for this walkthrough today, as mentioned, we're going to talk about the purpose of JavaScript and how it's used, history, importance of logic in the history of computer science, introduction to conditional statements, and then we're going to apply it all in a project. Love it. So what is JavaScript? So I was just talking a little bit about this with Corey, but again, JavaScript is a very powerful and flexible and fast programming language used for things like complex web development, as we are talking about, but it also has a lot of other different applications too. It powers the dynamic behavior across a lot of websites, including Codecademy. And it is oftentimes one of the first programming languages that people learn because it can be used in so many different ways. So let's talk about those use cases a little bit. So this is what JavaScript looks like if you haven't seen JavaScript before. Initially, JavaScript was created to make web pages alive, right? We were talking about this in terms of interactivity. If you've done some of the HTML and CSS stuff, it's cool. And you can do a little bit of like animation stuff with CSS as well. But really, JavaScript is what, can make these really powerful, fun experiences that you may love on the web. So programs in JavaScript are called scripts. That's where the name comes from. They can be written right into web pages HTML, and they run automatically as the page loads. They don't need any special preparation or compilation to run like some other languages like Java. Sometimes people get confused. Is there a relationship between Java and JavaScript? There is no relationship. It was just that Java was a really popular language when JavaScript was first invented. So, I kind of talked about that relationship between other languages that you might be familiar with, HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. I love this graphic because I think it just, really helps you understand what is the role again of each of these different languages when building a website. So with HTML, sometimes we think about it as like the bones of the page. It's where you add your elements to them. CSS is going to add some styling to it, a little bit of pizzazz, but JavaScript really enables you to move and transform elements and create something like a game. So a lot of this is kind of what we term as like the front end, what you would see when you end up on a web page. But what's cool about JavaScript is that you can also use it to program servers or the back end of a web page. So that's going to make your website more powerful, store data, things like that. And what's great, again, is if you're interested in becoming a full stack software engineer, that means that you don't have to necessarily go out and learn another language like Python or Java, which are other great backend programming languages, but you could stick with JavaScript for your first one. So talked a lot about JavaScript in relation to web development, but Corey mentioned in my bio, I'm an artist, I'm a creative technologist. One of the things that I love about JavaScript is that it has a ton of different applications. There's some really cool libraries out there that enable you to program using JavaScript. So again, we've talked about websites. That's awesome. But one of my favorite things to do is program creative coding applications in a language called P5.js. That's powered off of JavaScript. And once you know JavaScript, it's really easy to pick up. You can create data visualizations with D3. You can create 3D models with 3.js. You can create your own games with Phaser.js, and you can even do some machine learning with ML5.js, which is pretty neat. Even more applications, you can do programming with music with Tone.js. And one of my favorites, we have a course on this, is a program called A-Frame, which uses HTML and CSS and JavaScript to build in-browser VR and AR experiences. So again, lots of really cool stuff, very worth your while to learn JavaScript. And that's why JavaScript was one of the first, I keep saying one of the first, it was the first programming languages that we taught here at Codecademy starting back in 2011. So just wanted to show some like fun screenshots of what Codecademy used to look like back in the day. This is our very first JavaScript course, our Getting Started with Programming course. And you can see, similar today, we had that, we have a 2-panel here with the console, and you have those tasks that we had, and you'd go through and you would run your code. Again, Codecademy, if y'all didn't know, was really the company that pioneered interactive learning on the web, which is pretty cool. Back in 2017, we did a massive update to teach the latest version of JavaScript. So we've kind of iterated our JavaScript course over the past, gosh, how many years is it? 12 years now. And, with that, our platform has also grown. We've added more courses, but we've continued to improve our JavaScript content as well. Even most recently, we updated our React courses, which is a JavaScript framework. And so, yeah, so you can see the learning environment, as we call it, the LE, starting to look more similar to what you may have seen today with that 3-panel. We have, the checkpoints, we're checking your code. And then what we have today, which we all know and love. So yeah, so that's basically just the evolution of JavaScript on Codecademy. So now we're going to switch gears and we're going to talk a little bit about the role of logic in programming, because the project that we're doing today is called Race Day, and it's in the Learn JavaScript course in our 3rd module on conditional statements. And if you're not familiar with conditional statements allow us to add programming logic into our programs. And I think it's this really powerful moment when you're learning how to code, because before that, you're getting the basics down, you're learning about variables, you're learning about comments, you're putting things to the console. You can see how you can do basic calculations with operators. But when you learn conditional statements, this is the moment where you can start to see the power of using a computer program versus just doing something yourself with a calculator, right? You can start to see branching logic. So to talk a little bit about the history of logic and how that's impacted computer science and programming, logic is I would say, foundation of computer science in many ways, and it's certainly the foundation of artificial intelligence. And this whole live stream series is about, how we're evolving as the learning platform, especially within this, new moment of artificial intelligence with applications like ChatGPT. So I think it's cool to kind of come back to the beginning, talk about JavaScript as our first course, but also talk about the foundations of computer programming and artificial intelligence within the world of logic. I don't know if there are any people out here who like reading graphic novels, but if you are interested in learning more about the history and the development of logic as a field and how it, again, created the foundations of computer science, I definitely recommend Logic Comics. It's the story of the foundational quest of mathematics and how Bertrand Russell and Alfred North Whitehead pursued the idea that mathematics is based on a logical system. It doesn't get into actual the development of logic in relation to computer science. It kind of hints at it at the end, but it again talks a lot about these kind of foundational arguments that were happening between mathematicians in the 19th century. So, to talk a little bit about how Bertrand Russell's and Whitehead's work influenced computer scientists, the very first artificial intelligence program known as the logic theorist system was actually built with the intention to prove some of the mathematical theorems in Bertrand and Whitehead's work, which is super interesting. So this program, the logic theorist program, was written in 1956 by Alan Newell, Herbert A. Simon, who are here, and also someone named Cliff Shaw. And it was the first program to deliberately engineer to perform automated reasoning. So it was designed to mimic the problem-solving abilities of a human, right? Now we can understand how we get to artificial intelligence here. So interestingly enough, the logic theorists proved 38 of the first 52 theorems in chapter 2 of Whitehead and Russell's Principia Mathematica. I know this is real nerdy stuff right here, but bear with me. But it was a really major moment. So again, not only does logic provide the foundation of computer science, but also logicians are using computers in order to further their work and their research as well. So to talk a little bit more about artificial intelligence, I'm sure many of us here are familiar with chatbots, but while chatbots these days, especially like something like, ChatGPT, we can call a chatbot, are using pretty advanced forms of technology like neural networks. Back in the day, chatbots were really just based off of conditional statements. They really were just following these, control flows. And so Eliza was one of these early chatbots, was one of the first programs even capable of attempting the Turing test. And I think it's interesting, and we'll talk about this as we get into the project in a second, but, we can look at something like a flow chart and we start seeing how, we can use a flow chart to come to decisions about what we want our program to do, right? Maybe you even used a flow chart at some point in your life to come to decisions about what you wanted to do. But this is a great way to pseudocode out, right? To think through the logic of a computational program before we implement it with syntax in a language like JavaScript. All right, so that's a little bit of our part about logic and computer science. Looks like Melanie's in the chat answering questions. And yeah, so with that, I'm going to jump into the project. So our project for today is the Race Day project. It is the second project in the Learn JavaScript course. So if you are enrolled in Learn JavaScript or any of our skill paths or our career paths that use our JavaScript content, you'll be able to find it there. As mentioned, it is in this third module here. And it's totally okay if you haven't programmed in JavaScript before. I'm gonna talk through what's in the program. And also this is not just a live stream, but being recorded and will be hosted on YouTube. So, feel free to, after this live stream, go and do the project and then come back and rewatch this live stream if you get stuck at all. We also have in this project a project walkthrough video too. So another person explaining how to go about programming it. All right. With that, we're going to jump into Race Day. So we're going to just read over the prompt together. I'm going to talk about how this relates to using conditional statements and logic. All right, so Race Day. Codecademy's annual race is just around the corner. This year, we have a lot of participants. You've been hired to write a program that will register runners for the race and give them instructions on Race Day. So we have this visual here, and it basically tells us, as a timeline, registration would look like this. At 9:30 a.m., if you are an adult, which we're defining as being over 18 and you've registered early, you're going to start at that time. If you are an adult and you registered late, you're going to start at 11 a.m. And then anyone who is considered a youth, which is younger than 18 years of age, will start at 12:30. Doesn't matter what your registration are. So in addition to assigning someone a start time, we're also going to, towards the beginning of the project, assign everyone a race number. I don't know if y'all have run a race. I actually am running a race this Sunday and just got my race number in the mail. But you get a little bib, it has a number on it, and that's how you know what your time will be. So we're going to talk about how we're going to use conditional statements to assign race numbers to everyone in the race too. You may have noticed that we talked about assigning times for adults who are over 18. We talked about assigning times for youth who are under 18, but we have not planned for runners who are exactly 18. Don't worry about it. You can still run the race if you're 18. We're just going to handle that at the end of our project. So with that, I'm going to press start. If you've never done a project on Codecademy, let me just talk a little bit about what we've got here. So I went over the prompt, and below the prompt here, we have different tasks. You can see that we have 9 of them to complete. As we go through, we're going to check them off. You can also uncheck them. If we get stuck, we can open up a hint. And then over here is our code editor, our IDE. And this is actually where we're going to write our code out together. And then over here is our output console. So if I, want to print something to the console, I can write console.log, write hello, and then I'm going to save that. And you can see after I've saved that, what I wanted to print to the console will appear here. So we'll be using a lot of these console.log statements to check our work as we go along. I'm also going to have us, talk a little bit about, again, the syntax that we're going to be using in this. I've mentioned things like conditional statements. We're also going to be talking about comparison operators, logical operators, also known as Boolean operators, as we go through. So it's totally okay. Again, if you haven't learned this stuff before, we'll explain things as we go along. All right. So with that, going back to the project prompt, I think one thing that's important to call out here, if it wasn't already kind of apparent as I was reading through it, is that we have a lot of different situations happening here, right? And that's a good signal to us that we want to use conditional statements, that depending on the data that we're inputting, whether it be in this case, age, registration status, we want to make sure that based on the specific data that our program is receiving, that we're going to output the correct information, in this case, for our user who's signing up for the race, right? So again, if you are building a project on your own, if you have an idea for your own project, or you come across a project you've never done before, or something like a code challenge, and you see these, certain requirements asking for different outputs, it's probably a good indicator that you want to use conditional statements for them. So, just to talk a little bit more about conditional statements. Again, I kind of mentioned flowcharts in the beginning, but this is, I think, like a great way of, if you're going into a project where you're thinking about how you have different conditions that are going to end up in different outputs, you can use a flowchart to think that through. Oops, moving forward accidentally. So, this is just, again, an example of a flowchart. Lamp, does it work? You check and see if the lamp's plugged in. If it's not, okay, plug in the lamp. If it is, check if the bulb's burned out, if it's still not working. You can replace the bulb, no, repair the lamp, right? So you have these things and you're checking, basically, is it true or is it false? So in programming, that question that we're kind of asking ourselves is a Boolean expression. It's called a Boolean expression because, again, we're checking to see, is it true? Is the condition true or is the condition false? And we want to do different tasks depending on what the condition is. So what that looks like when we're writing it out is something called an if statement or an if else statement. So you say, if this specific condition, and if this condition, this Boolean statement here is true, then we're going to execute the code that's within this block here. What's cool is you could just have an if statement and that's it and move forward. Or if you have multiple conditions that you want to check, you can use else ifs. And if you just want to make sure that there could be, any situation outside of the ones we're checking, you can use an else, and that will execute if condition 2 is false. All right. So just setting that up a little bit, it's going to help us with the project. All right. Coming back to it, let's dive into these tasks. So before we actually get into the logical part of our programming, we have a little bit of setup to do. So in this first task, we're being told that race numbers are assigned randomly. We've already provided the necessary code that will power this random generation at the top of the file. So you can see this here. We have a variable called race number, and we're setting it equal to math.floor. And within that parentheses is math.random times 1,000. So these are some built-in functions that JavaScript gives us, which is very nice of them. And basically, they programmatically will give us a certain set of numbers. It's between 0, inclusive of 0, and exclusive of 1. So everything up to 1. In order to get to 1,000, we multiply it, and this is the multiplication operator here, the little asterisk, by 1,000. But that's not going to give us nice even numbers. And so that's why we use math.floor here. So I'm going to just show you what some outputs of this look like. So I can console.log race number, and then I'm going to save it. And we can see that it output 930. Okay, great. So I can just keep doing this for a little while, and we can start to see the range of numbers that we get between 0 and 1,000. Fantastic. We can check off this task. If you weren't familiar with that, again, we have hints here, which are super nice parts of projects. So just explains exactly what I said here. And yeah. All right. So next step, we need to create some variables in steps 2 through 3. So we are going to create a variable that indicates whether a runner is registered or not. And we are going to set it equal to a Boolean value. You'll change this later as you test different runner conditions. So remember, again, I kind of mentioned Boolean values, right? So Boolean means, is it going to be true or is it going to be false? Those are the only two options that we have, right? So we are going to say we're going to use the const version because we don't need to change. Well, we're not going to change it in our program, which is why we're going to use const. We can change it ourselves, you know. So we can say const, you can use let. It's fine. This is just a little project. Const registered early. I'm going to set this to false, but we can change this again to see how our program will change in the future. Great. Again, we can see here, const registered. They also set it to false. And then we're going to create a variable for the runner's age and set it equal to a number. So I'm going to do const age, and I'm going to give it 21. I myself am not 21, but you know, 21 is a great age. Okay, so with that, oh, I'm seeing folks want me to zoom in a bit. Okay.
I'm just gonna pop in and say that.
All right, is that better? Good on that. All right. Let me know if y'all need anything else from me. Thanks for interrupting. Okay. So we've gone through steps 1 through 3, nice and speedy. So now we're going to get into the meat of it. Going into step 4. So now we're going to create a control flow statement that checks whether the runner is an adult and registered early. And if so, if that's true, we're going to add 1,000 to their race number. All right. Okay, awesome. I'm seeing it's better. I'm so glad that's easier to read. I also have astigmatism, so feel you on that. All right. So control flow is a general term for any kind of, again, syntax that determines the flow of our program. So conditional statements, but you could also say a loop is a control flow as well. But in this case, again, we're going to be talking about conditional statements, those if else if statements. So with that, we only really have one condition here, right? So we're going to check whether the runner is an adult and registered early. I got a little bit ahead of myself because I kind of want to show a couple different ways of coding this. As you know, there are a couple different ways, always usually in programming, of solving a problem. So I'm going to show you one way, and then I'm going to show you how we can refactor our code to be a little bit neater and use some logical operators with that. So first, I'm going to break this up. Okay, so we have actually 2 Boolean statements that are happening right here. We want to first check that runner is an adult. We want to make sure that's true. And then we also want to check and see if they registered early. So I'm going to say if, and we defined age as being greater than 18, right? So I'm going to say age is greater than, you might remember this from math class, right? You want to have it being eating the bigger number, 18. And then I'm going to open some curly braces here. All right, so this is the first part of our program. And I just want to talk a little bit more about comparison operators, just in case anyone's not familiar with this. So let me pop back over to my little presentation here. So comparison, also known as relational operators. For some reason, operators, we always have like multiple names for the same thing, but we have this way of relating things. And then you can see over here, depending on how it evaluates, we can get a Boolean value of that. And again, we use that to determine if the condition is going to be true. And thus, whatever it goes into will happen. So we talked about having greater than. You can also have less than. You can even add an equal sign, so you could be inclusive of a number. Same thing here. We can also check if two values are equal. And we can also check to see if something is not equal as well. We'll talk more about this exclamation point or bang operator, also known as the not operator, in a few more steps too. So again, this is just like a helpful little kind of cheat sheet to remember what we're kind of looking for. And, you know, in our case, we want to make sure that it's going to evaluate, well, depending on what our age is, of course, right? But in this case, we're looking for adults, and, you know, if the condition is true, it should evaluate to true. All right. So then our second part here is registered early. So I can write another statement that says if registered early. Now, again, like I said before, there's a couple different ways of doing this. You could say, as we just looked at in the comparison operators, you could use that double or triple equal sign to check for true. And then open this up. And I'm just going to say, we'll get to the second part of that, but I'm just going to console.log true. Let's see if that works. All right, so I forgot we had this console log race number here, but as you can see, it didn't evaluate to true because we had registered early as false. So if I change this to registered early, this should get us to say true. Okay, so let me break that down again. Right now, my age is above 18, and I have actually registered. So when I get into this first Boolean statement and I'm checking to see if the variable age is greater than 18, that's going to go to true, right? 21 is more than 18. And then for registered early, checking to see if it's true, that's also going to evaluate to true because I changed this to true. Remember, if I had this as false, nothing's going to show up here except for that race number here, which I'm just going to comment this out. Remember to comment out, you can just put 2 slashes in front of it. Nothing's going to show up because this is false. So registered early is not able to evaluate to true. All right. So with that, I'm going to do a little bit of refactoring. So one place I'm going to start is you actually don't need to set registered early and check it that it equals true. You can just put this value in. If there is a value that exists, or there, I should say, if there's a variable and it has a value, it means that it's going to be considered as a true statement, I should say, except if, you know, the value is false. And then another thing that we can do is we can actually combine these into one Boolean statement here. I don't have to have them nested in this way. So I do that by, I'm just going to kind of roughly do this, and then I'm going to get rid of my curly brace. And then I'm going to use a logical operator or Boolean operator called and I do that by putting 2 ampersands in between them. So let's talk a little bit about Boolean operators really quickly. So Boolean operators look like this. We have a logical and operator, which again are those 2 ampersands, or we have an or operator. And you can see, similar to how we were looking at the comparison ones, that, you know, they can evaluate in different ways. So if we have 2 true statements, then it evaluates to true. If it's true and false, it's going to be false. If it's false and true, it's false and false. And is very, very strict, as you can tell. Or we're a little bit more flexible on it, right? You get more trues out of it and only 1 false. But in this case, we're being strict. You have to be an adult. You have to have registered early. So we're going to stick with and there. And now let's save it. It's still going to be blank, which is what we expected because it's false. Up there, we did not register early. So if we change that to true, it's true again. Great. All right, but I didn't finish this task. I don't want it to be true in here. What I really want to have happen is, one, I'm not actually console logging anything. I just need to add race number. So again, couple different ways you can program this. You can take the race number variable and you can have it equal to, you can set it equal to itself plus 1,000. And we can now, I'm just gonna uncomment this so we can see this change. So we can see that initially when we generate this number, it's 209, but now when we generate it, it is 1,209. Amazing. Our conditional statement worked. Again, to do a little bit of refactoring, you may remember this, but you don't have to write something as long as this. You can actually change it to be, and I'll just write it below so you can see it. Race number plus equals 1,000. And so this is the exact same process, but it's just a little bit cleaner. We just like our code to be clean, right? So I'll save that, show that it's still doing the same stuff. Fantastic. All right, so that was number 4. The tasks after this are very similar, so we're going to go through them a little bit more speedily. But again, please make sure to keep asking questions. Melanie will let me know. Fantastic. All right, so for step number 5, we're going to create a separate control flow statement below the first, and then this statement will check age and registration time to determine race time. Okay, so now we're getting into the second part, if you remember, of the prompt. We've currently figured out how we're determining race number. So now we're going to get into this portion where we're determining start time. So again, we didn't need to create an else situation here. Basically, if you met this criteria, your number is going to be 1,000. Otherwise, your race number is going to be below 1,000. So starting our new control flow conditional statement, I'm going to say if, and this is actually the same Boolean statement that we have above, right? For runners over 18 who registered early. We just copy and paste. Sure, if you've been programming at this point, you know, copy and pasting, something you end up doing quite frequently. But what's going to happen within it is going to be a new thing that we want to execute in our program. So I want to log a statement to the console telling them that they will race at 9:30, and I'm going to include their race number. Excellent. So we've seen some console log statements already here. So I'm going to type console.log. And prior to this, I was just kind of inputting strings, right? Strings are texts that we wrap with quotation marks, single or double. But what I want to do instead is I'm going to use something called string interpolation. So that you use the backticks in it, not the quotation marks, but it makes it much easier if we're putting a variable within our console.log statement, just like in terms of writing it. Again, just kind of neatness. So console.log, I'm going to tell them you will race at 9:30 a.m. and your number is, and this is where it gets funky, you do a $, curly brace, which we give you both of them at the same time, just make sure your cursor's inside of it. And then I'm just going to put that race number variable right there. Okay, awesome. So let's save that and let's see. Fantastic. Okay, so maybe I'll keep that console.log statement, below the other conditional statement, just so we can see kind of the whole logic of our program. So first, we're generating a number. Second, if our input here matches these conditions, we should add 1,000 to it. That's happening there. And now we should see if we're still matching that data, then we're going to be told that we're going to race at 9:30 and our race number is going to be exactly what we got before, 1532. Awesome. We're doing great.
Hey, Zoe, we got a question. The question is, what if I add 1,000 to race number in the initial declaration?
In the initial declaration, like up here? I'm guessing. So you can do that. But the thing is that you're not going to be following the project prompt, right? So we'll see that in a little bit as we get into these other conditions, that we don't always want 1,000 added to our race number. We only want 1,000 added to our race number if someone is an adult who registered early. So if we have it happen up here when we're defining the variable race number, we're no longer making that a condition that we are looking at. Does that make sense? I hope so. Any other questions? All right. Feel free to keep interrupting me. So I hope that didn't come off sarcastically, because it definitely was not meant to be sarcastic. Okay. We're going to get into some fun stuff now. So we've gone through our first one, and our second one is that late adults, I love that, late adults who registered late are going to run at 11. So we are going to be creating another conditional statement, and it's going to be part of this same flow, right? Because what happens when you write a multiple conditional statement is it's going to check the first one. If it's false, we want it to jump into the second one and then check if that one's true. If that second one is false, then maybe we want to have an else statement. You could have so many else ifs in here, although at a certain point, if you really have like more than 2, 3, you probably want to use a switch statement instead, which is also gone over in the lesson before. So I encourage you to check it out. But we only have really like 4 conditions in here, I believe. So we're going to use else if, and this time it's a little bit different, right? So we're still checking for adults. So we're still going to use that greater than comparison operator. We still have a second condition, but this time we are checking to see if they registered late. So how do we define that someone has registered late? Well, we could see, like we did before, registered early is equal to false, but there's a nicer way of doing this. And I kind of hinted at this before when we were going through things. So there's something called the not operator, and basically it reverses what we get into. So if we put this not operator or the bang operator in front of a statement, it's negating the true and returns false. Or it can say that that's, so that's what we're looking for here, is we want to return false. So all I'm going to do is put this little exclamation point before registered early. And that's our Boolean statement for the second condition here. And so again, going to copy and paste, and I'm just going to change in this one that they are starting at 11 a.m. All right, so now I'm going to show that this can evaluate to true, and I'm going to do that by changing the value of this right here. So imagine we have someone here, let's say they're still adult, let's say instead that they're like 65, but they didn't register early. So I'm going to save this, and you can see now some things in our program have changed, okay? So we generated that random number, and it's 83. But because this person did not register early, we did not add 1,000 to the race number. The race number is just staying 83. Also, this person is not racing at 9:30. Instead, they're going to be racing at 11 a.m. And as you can see here, we also have the number 83 here. Awesome. So yeah, so, again, you could imagine this as a computer program where someone's logging in, they have, their information already, and the computer is looking and checking for, again, these things like, did this person register early? How old is this person? Et cetera, et cetera. We're just kind of doing this like in the project right now, but, maybe you could have a user input within your program that enables people, again, going back to the interactivity part of JavaScript, right? You can imagine a front end that you program, and this is some of the logic on the back end, but actually has the opportunity for someone to input these values. But we're just using them for testing. Okay, almost there. So now we've been talking a lot about adults. We're going to get to the youth. So for the youth, we want another conditional statement. And again, we're going to use else if. So else if age, and this time we want to say age is less than 18. And Oh, and so we don't have to care about the registration. So we don't have to use any of these logical or operators right here. We can actually just keep it as just checking if they are below 18, because it doesn't matter if they registered early. We don't have to check for it. Nice and easy. So we're just going to take that console.log, put it in, and then we are going to change it to 12:30. Youth get to sleep in, lucky them. And your race number is going to be race number. So what we want to do now is we're going to change this to 15, and we should expect to see that we get to this third conditional. So let me press save. All right, again, generating a number. We're not adding 1,000 to it because they are not above 18, they are below 18. So we're just completely bypassing this if statement because it was false. And we are also bypassing both of these first two statements here because they also evaluate to false, because in both cases, it's checking to see if they're over 18 and they're not. I'm also going to show you that, again, changing this value from false to true doesn't matter in this case because we're not checking for it. Still racing at 12:30. All right, so 8, enter in different combinations of values for the two variables you created and run your code several times. We've been kind of doing that along the way. So, you know, honestly, my preference is check your code as you go, you know, use a lot of like console.log statements as I kind of showed, change your inputs to make sure and stress test the different conditions that you're writing. And then there are some examples in the hint. So, you know, you can use these. Runners who start at 25 years old and registered early will run at 9:30. So we can just double check that, press save. Awesome. You can see that they're racing at 9:30 and they've got their number there. If we were to change that to false, save that. Now you can see that they're running at 11. We just did the teen one. So yeah, good to check your work. All right, but we have not finished yet. We need to remember the runners who are exactly 18, right? So we talked about this a little bit in the part around comparison operators, just to go back to that. So really, we're only using these less than and greater thans, which means that they're not inclusive. So we're not actually checking if someone is 18, only if they are older than 18 or younger than 18. So we need a condition for those 18-year-olds. So what we can just do is use an else statement. We don't need to put anything besides that. There's no, again, Boolean condition that we were checking there. And then we're just going to console.log that person needs to see the registration. If I could spell registration, that would be great. Registration desk. All right, so I'm going to save. Now let's check that. We're going to change this age to be 18. We're going to save it. Then we can see that the result is that they need to see the registration desk. Now, if you wanted to include 18-year-olds in either one of these categories, you know, some might say an 18-year-old is in fact an adult. We can add a equal sign to the conditions where we're checking to see if someone's an adult. So I'm going to add it here to this first one, because remember, this was for adults who registered early. I'm going to also add it to this one for adults who registered early and for adults who didn't register early. Now let's see what happens to our program for an 18-year-old. I'm going to click save. We can see that they jump down to this condition of 11. And if I change this, and that's because, again, the registration was false. So the previous two conditions didn't evaluate to true. But if I did change it to true, we can see they have a number in the thousands and that they're going to race at 9:30. So that is the entire race day project. Thank you for coding along with me. I see that we've had some really fantastic questions in the chat. Thank you so much to Melanie, who's been answering questions as we go. So I hope this was a really fun introduction for folks who haven't done much with conditional statements yet, who haven't gotten into the logic parts of programming, thinking about how things evaluate to true and false. Again, I feel like this is really going to unlock some powerful programs for folks who are just getting started here. And yeah, Fede, you want to take it away?
Here I am. Hey, thank
Hi.
you so much, Zoe. I think this is the most exciting part of the live stream today, which is the Q&A. We have about 10 minutes to go. So I would like to extend an invitation to everybody in the chat that is following along. If you have any questions for Zoe, this is the time to ask those questions. We'll be checking the chat. Anything you want to ask about JavaScript or I guess curriculum at Codecademy is fair game. We'll be reading through the chat and bringing up those questions. Zoe, do you mind turning the screen sharing off?
Yes, it should be off now.
Great, awesome, fantastic. So, while we wait for questions to come in, one question on my own. How do you feel about JavaScript versus Python? I know that a lot of people ask, oh, which one should I go for first?
Yeah, it's a great question. And, as a CS educator, it's one I personally go back and forth on. So, in addition to working at Codecademy, I've taught with Girls Who Code. I also teach a college class right now. And it really kind of depends on what the overall objectives are. I find that Python is an extremely powerful program that, similar to JavaScript, has a lot of different applications. And it's not surprising that Python's our first most popular course and JavaScript is our second one. So, with Python, you can get into data science applications. If you're really excited about AI, I would definitely recommend Python. And then if you are interested in very creative applications or doing more web development, web design, I think JavaScript is for you. And the great thing is, honestly, is you can learn both. Like when I was learning how to program, I started with JavaScript and then I took a Python class. It was actually So I went to this really wild grad program that was like all about fusing art and technology. So my Python class was a poetry class. And what I found is that learning a second language really helped ground me in the basic principles of programming topics like conditionals, like loops. So yeah, I'd say pick one language, Python or JavaScript, kind of depending on your, what you want to do in terms of projects, career, and then you could always come back to the second one.
Okay, great. I guess that's a lot more in depth than I've ever thought about it. So that's awesome. Yeah, JavaScript versus Python. I know that's a very contentious sort of question that everybody has.
Oh, people fight. I mean, you can get into the whole thing. I mean, I could talk about this forever, so please stop me. But there's all that like syntax sugar in JavaScript. Python's a little bit cleaner. Some folks like that more. So
I think something that people tend to forget is what you were talking about, how it transfers over. You learn a language, and then when you go to the second one, you see the commonalities, the variables, loops, the whole thing, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
So I think they're both great languages. I'm looking at the chat. Somebody was asking about AI tools in our coursework. Do you know anything about that?
AI tools in our coursework. Well, we are, developing some very exciting things right now. This is what so much of our big Codecademy Evolved campaign is about. I don't know how much I can talk about them right
now. Okay, yeah, we don't want to spoil too much. Okay.
I know, no spoilers. Some really fun surprises coming up. We've done some AI coursework. We've actually been developing, I think everyone knows this, but artificial intelligence has been around for a while. As I talked about in the presentation, it's been around since the turn of the last, midway point through the last century. But, ChatGPT has really just kind of opened a lot of people's eyes outside of, the tech world to the power of AI. So we have, our Intro to ChatGPT course, highly recommend taking that. That kind of walks you through how to do prompts with ChatGPT, but also like the history and the technology itself. But we also have some really cool artificial intelligence. We have like a great learn how to build your own chatbot program, our skill path. So, definitely recommend looking into those things.
I think I just saw Matt Simon asking a really good question. I think this goes across the board. Pretty much everybody has encountered this before, which is, the question is it just me or is it normal to feel frustrated sometimes when you feel you are not grasping a certain concept?
Oh, it is not just you, Matt Simon. It is definitely not just you. It is incredibly normal when learning something new to feel frustrated. Actually, I think it is a sign that you are learning if you're feeling frustrated, right? Like if it was easy, you wouldn't be learning it. So I would say, a big part of learning something new is to be resilient and, continue learning. I mean, there are things I've been learning to code now for, I don't know, like 8 years, and there's still new things that I find out, or my knowledge of it expands, especially, through teaching. I always see things in new ways. So it is totally normal to feel frustrated and not get concepts at first. You just, take your time, keep coming back to it. Take time for rest. Honestly, I say this also as a creative person, your best ideas come after, you've gone for a walk or in the shower, or sometimes even asleep. I have friends who are software engineers and they'll dream about bugs that they're trying to solve and wake up and be like, oh, okay, yeah, now I know how to go about it. So give yourself the time.
Nice. I see a related question here, which is about doing multiple passes through learning at the same thing. And these users mentioning other sites out there online that you can go to learn online. And I think that this is something that we're not shy about when we talk about how we at Codecademy are hoping to be that great resource to learn to code. But, everybody learns differently at different pace and different learning techniques. And sometimes it's good to, even if it's the same content, to cover in different formats or in different places.
Oh, yeah, 100%. I mean, this is something I personally feel passionate about. So our team is really interested in learning about, learning science, and we take learning science research and use that to design all of our courses. And something we feel, again, really important is how you develop what's known as a mental model, right? What is your personal understanding of this information that you're getting? And I personally find one of the best ways to build a mental model is to engage with a ton of different resources on the same subject, because people are going to explain something like conditional statements in a lot of different ways. And some may click with you better than others. Maybe they use the right metaphor that really resonates with you. I think, there are some interesting things too about like learning modalities. I would say one interesting thing we found out when reading about learning science is like, the more closely you do something, and you're going to say this is a whole plug for Codecademy and learning on Codecademy, but the more closely you learn something in the way that you would apply it, it's going to stick better with you, right? Like you wouldn't necessarily learn how to play soccer by only watching YouTube videos. It's the same for coding. You can absolutely watch a video on YouTube of someone coding. And again, I think it helps build that mental model. But what drew me to Codecademy when I was a learner before I even started working here was getting to actually write the code and getting it tested for me, which I thought was great. But yeah, I mean, there are so many wonderful resources out there. If you're looking to learn JavaScript, really recommend the Eloquent JavaScript book. That's like a classic text. And I think, getting your information again will just help you further internalize it and really remember all of the information that you're learning.
Nice. Great. So one last question here while we still have time. Eric Lozada is asking, I'm trying to build my web design business. Should I take the front-end engineer path or build a website skill path? So I guess the question is, out of in our catalog, what would you recommend for somebody looking to build a web design business?
Yeah, I think that's a really great question. So we design our offerings for people who have different goals. And so I think if you're choosing between a skill path like build websites versus a career path like front end, I'd recommend starting with the skill path, because unless you have a personal interest in becoming a front end web developer, there is going to be a lot of additional information in the career path. And that's great for someone who wants that. We want to make sure it's comprehensive, that people feel really confident that they have all the information at their hand to be able to get a job in that role. But if you are looking to build something very specific, that's why we design our skill paths. They're a bit faster and they get you to your goal quicker. I'd also recommend, if you're interested in web design, we actually have some really fantastic new visual design content that's come out this past year, some UI UX materials. So I would also dig into those courses first. And then, can supplement with the build websites to build your own website.
Nice. Okay. Well, that was all the time we have for Q&A today.
Okay.
I want to thank everybody for stopping by the live stream today. And please join me in the chat to thank the great Zoe for her presentation today. I think it was very fun and useful. And a lot of people are going to watch this live today or later, and they're going to enjoy the content that we put out. So thank you, Zoe, for that.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me.
Yeah. And if you like the content that you saw today and you want to practice on your own, don't forget to stop by and create a free account with Codecademy. You can do that today. Start going on in your JavaScript journey. Try to get as good as Zoe at JavaScript, I guess. We'll see you there online in our community spaces. Also, don't forget to subscribe and follow us on YouTube, because we are having a 3-part series on these content. So today was part 1, but we will be live again next week, same time, same day, Thursday, and the following week on the 17th of August. So we're hoping to see you all there. And of course, you can follow us on social media like Twitter, LinkedIn, Instagram, to keep up to date with all of our content and all the coursework that we put out and all the events that we're having in the future. So thank you, everybody, for stopping by, and we'll see you next week. Have a good one, everybody.
Bye.
And that's it. That's the live stream. It's over.